Well, listen, thanks so much for joining me, Bill. I know you and I have known each other for a while, and I've really seen you build your board career over the last few years. So it's great to have you on. So to start out with, just tell us about your executive career in banking and how you got to where you were in your executive career.
Well, thanks, Naomi, for this opportunity. Our relationship, as you said, was really forged. I think you may have been one of the very first individuals that I reached out to when I was wanting to what do they call it, rewire myself to move from an executive role into a more create a portfolio of board service and our relationship has grown out of that what was an introductory conversation. As for how I got to where I am, I spent a career in primarily in banking after starting my career in public accounting with one of the what was Big Eight firms back in the day, and then had an opportunity to go to work for a small cap publicly traded bank holding company as the CFO, and then shortly thereafter, I actually assumed the CEO role. And we sold that bank in the late 90s. And I had an opportunity to stay with the regional bank, which bought us. And they allowed me to continue to grow in that role and into what was an executive vice president, division leader with responsibility for community banking operations in 8 states. And people say, "Well, why did you stay?" And I say, "Well, they fulfilled what I needed. They were giving me the professional challenge and the opportunity to grow, and it was a very rich and rewarding experience." But then, a little over 3 years ago, it was time to move on, and so up to that point, all of my board work had primarily been civic and community, and we'll probably talk about that later, how that maybe prepared me for fiduciary board work. But most of my board work had been in the civic community role and everything soup to nuts that you would have thought of. And the bank really it discouraged any involvement from a fiduciary board standpoint, for profit role.
Is
And so
that
I knew
is that
that's
a conflict of interest type reason? Like why do some companies not allow their employees to be on corporate boards?
that's not so much that they don't allow it, they kind of discouraged it because they wanted your undivided attention to doing your job and fulfilling your role. And I had plenty to say grace over. So while that's the one thing that, and I look back on my career, I wish I'd have had an opportunity. So that's why when I get an opportunity to talk to anyone, I said, start early, start young, start building that experience from a board standpoint. And so, as I said, so 3 years ago, when I asked myself, okay, what's my next? What's next for Bill? I said, I look at my body of work and my skills and my experience and where I get my battery charged and recharged. I thought, board service is something I think that would align with all of those things. So, as I said, that's what led me to you. I remember one of the very first webinars I listened to. You were being featured, and you talked about, what it takes to be board ready, and so it got all my creative juices flowing, and so I really set out on a journey to really position myself to be board ready. And it's been a journey, and maybe we'll talk about that. But that's how I got from my professional career in commercial banking and public accounting that prepared me for what I'm doing today.
That's great. And you talked a minute ago about sort of having professional challenge in your executive career. but there were probably other things that were driving you to be on boards. What was it? Obviously, it's not professional challenge anymore, but perhaps there is. But were there other things that were driving you to get onto boards?
Well, I think a couple of things come to mind, and probably it's more than a couple, but one is I've always had an insatiable appetite for continuing to grow and learn. And so being on a board would require you to do that. If you're going to be an effective board member, you got to continually be growing, whatever it's the industry or whatever the technical area is. You're constantly learning and growing, and so that's part of my DNA. I love people. Um, you've probably seen that a little bit. I mean, I've never met a stranger, young, old, it doesn't matter. I love people, and I love meeting new people, and so I think that is a value in the boardroom. I looked at your 10 attributes that you published recently and you've got to be able to communicate. Um, and that's something that I think, and I tell this to my grandchildren all the time. You may not have to be the smartest person in the room, but if you can effectively communicate orally and in writing, there will be a place for you. I really believe that. So I think
And what
that's
does that mean effectively? I mean, in a boardroom environment, I think for a lot of people, they think, they have to use big language and all of these things. It's almost you have to simplify things on a board, right? And make it easy to understand. Is that right?
yeah. When we live in a society, unfortunately, that is so divided, the mere many times the mere opposition of a point of view shuts people down. And I thrive in that environment, not the conflict part of it, but the constructive part of discourse and dialogue. And so I had somebody tell me one time that was proctoring a meeting of mine or sitting in on a meeting of mine, and that they came out of it and they said, "Wow, I can't believe." And this happened to be my direct reports, and it was fairly senior level people, and they said, "I can't believe you let them talk like that and challenge you like that. Didn't that bother you?" And I said, "No, I welcome that." And I think boardrooms sometimes shy away probably from having a discourse in their conversation. And I think if done correctly, it's and properly, it's healthy. And so if you can be a beacon of light for someone sitting in the boardroom that maybe has an opposing view, and maybe you happen to be the one that gives them the courage to speak up, that's powerful. And so when I talk about communication, I think that's where it can play itself out in the boardroom, but also in listening and learning from which board members have a responsibility to, not to meddle into the day-to-day operations or management, but they have a responsibility to know what's going on. And if their only source of information is the CEO, they're probably not fulfilling their duties. And so being able to interact without imposing or threatening or intimidating, I think those are all important traits that are important in the boardroom as well.
So it sounds like it's like a mixture of experience, all the skills you bring, but also those attributes. So how did you land your first board? How did you kind of package all of this together, and then go out to the market and then be successful to get into your first board?
So it's a journey, right? It is a journey, and so we talked about that. My career really was in financial services with a commercial bank. so it only was a natural fit that I should be an attractive candidate for a bank. And so um, that was one of the first places. Actually, they reached out to me to engage in a conversation to see whether I had any interest in joining the board. And so I was very fortunate that one of my first post career boards was in an industry that I know very well, feel very comfortable in, and in this case, I happen to know it's a closely held community bank, and I happen to know the family that owns the bank, and so I didn't have to do a lot of research about the integrity and what the bank was about. So that I was very fortunate from that standpoint.
You know, if young people are listening to this and they're thinking, networks and relationships, sure, they're important, but I think there comes a time when your reputation and your relationships combined become really important for you, especially if you're pivoting and moving into something new. So, what would you say to them? What would you go back and say to yourself, or what would you say to younger people who are thinking about building their network in an authentic way, of course?
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned authentic because I think that was one of the first things you told me. I said, don't try to be something that you're not. I mean, and it served me well being Bill for my career. So why would I try to do something different because I'm moving into a board role? But so I think my advice for younger individuals, I mentioned it earlier, is start your board journey as early as possible, and find things that you're passionate about that you really genuinely want to get involved in. And while civic, community, nonprofit board work is not the same as a fiduciary board, it can be very much as rewarding and equip you to at least understand the dynamics of a board if it's the right one. I think some of the best civic and community board work I was fortunate enough to be involved in equipped me very well to understand board governance, the role of committees, the difference between the board's role versus management's role. So I think while it's not the same, I think it can be every bit as rewarding from a preparatory standpoint of preparing you for board work. In terms of what they're doing in their careers, my advice is the same whether they're considering board work or if it's advancing their careers. And that is never run away from a challenge, run to a challenge, look for opportunities to grow. Um, if there's an opportunity to get involved in a project outside of your span of control, do that. Um, Learn how to, what you talked about networking, learn how to build relationships across the organization because you never know when those relationships will come in handy for you. And so I am, you mentioned networking. I'm also a big believer in networking. What was the old adage, 6 degrees of separation? I think that's outdated. I think that the new adage ought to be 2 degrees of separation. I, I'd really, I've not put myself to this test. I guess I have in some ways. It's like you'd say, Bill, do you know so and so? And I'd say, well, no, but if I did a little research, I would think I could get to them in 2 or 3 clicks. Um, and so, um, and those networks, once again, the year I keep referring back. You kind of helped me understand the power of the network. Is that is that never underestimate who in your network can be a resource for you. And I've had to be reminded of that because a lot of times you say, well, if this person's not a CEO or in the C-suite, they may not be valuable in my network, and that's not necessarily true. So
Yeah, you're
so
spot on. You never, I always say it's the people that have known you for a long time. They trust you. They like you. There's a huge element of trust, right? Bringing someone onto the board. I mean, obviously, it's a big role. It's an oversight role. It's an high integrity role. But why do you think it is that people will bring on people that they trust? And yeah, why is that?
well, so I learned this, I think, in the last 3 or 4 years that there's a level to get to trust. And I don't know if this is true all the time, but it resonated with me. And they said first somebody has to know you, okay? Then they gotta like you before they will trust you. And that I don't know if I'm articulating it exactly, but that kind of resonated with me. So as I'm building my network and constantly looking at build, it's even I don't even it's not even a conscious. I just do it automatically. But I want somebody. So if I'm going to meet Naomi for the first time, I want to try to give her something. First of all, I want to know something about her. It's not all about the individual, right? And so I'm going to try to create a conversation so that Naomi will walk away from that knowing me, knowing something about me, something that's unique, something. What's the hook? What's being authentic? And that's how it comes out, being authentic. If I try to script it, it's you're going to see through that. So you're not going to care whether you know me or not. And then I'm going to try to create enough in the conversation to where you like me. And hopefully I've done that with you. Hopefully we've moved past the no, and we're past the like. But and then if I just but I'm saying no and like as precursors to trust, because you got to build that before somebody can trust you, right? If I just had a first meeting and I said, well, just trust me, Naomi, I'm who I say I am. Well, that's not going to be. So why is that important in whether you're looking for a job or looking for a board opportunity? We only have X amount of political capital that we can expend. And if 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 I've not earned your trust, how can I expect you to expend your political capital in referring me for whatever, you know, whether it's a board opportunity or to speak um, somewhere or to write an article. So that trust is really important. That when you think about your network, and so if you think of LinkedIn, you got level one, level two, level three, but probably not all level one, associates are truly. Do you have you really earned that level of trust with? But that's really something I really strive for as I've been on this board journey.
And then tell us, is there anything that surprised you when you were on the board? I know you and I have talked a bit about onboarding and what that looks like. So maybe you could share that with share that with us because I thought that was really interesting. But also when you're actually on the board and serving on boards, what was interesting there that you found?
Well, I think, and this is not my quote, I don't know who, but it's common if you do any if you as you begin to on the board journey, you'll often hear somebody say, Well, if you've been on a board, you've been on a board. In other words, no two boards are alike, and that is really the case. And you mentioned onboarding. That's been specifically the case. I've had situations where I've been quote onboarded by, well, our board meets on such and such a date, such and such a month, such and such a time. Um, um, that's pretty much the extent of the onboarding. So you'll sit there in your first board meeting, and you're kind of looking at an agenda, and you're really having to onboard yourself. Um, I've had the opposite of that. I've the total opposite of that, of where the organization went through great staking pains to put together a binder of material that talked about the history of the organization, talked about the culture, talked about the the operations of the entity. So went through a very formal onboarding exercise, and to reach out, continue to reach out, and following board meetings and say, okay, what did you not, what weren't you following if there was anything in the board meeting? So, I've seen both extremes. Um, and obviously, I would lean more to the latter, to where I think if you really want someone to be an effective board member, they've got to invest the time, and the organization has to invest the time to equip you to do that. But as I said, if you've been on a board, you've been on a board, and so don't be surprised that your experience may be either one of those or somewhere in between.
And Bill, we touched on this just at the beginning. I know that you have been very heavily involved in the community, and that's important for you and your values. And nonprofit boards, I often talk to people in their sort of 20s and 30s and even 40s who are thinking, how do I, if I can't serve on a corporate board, I don't perhaps have the experience to be on a corporate board. Where is a good starting point? And sometimes it may be a not for profit, and some of them can be, I think, extremely valuable for your career. And you need to choose the right nonprofit. But tell us about your experience on nonprofits, and how that helped you, or any advice you would give to someone thinking about it.
Well, boy, I could speak for hours about my civic and community, because it was part of, I guess you could say it was part of what came with the turf, with my role as a banker, and a market leader, that you would expect me to be involved in that. I look at one of my most rewarding experiences was the Kentucky State Chamber of Commerce Board, where I had the opportunity to actually serve as the chair of that board. And so you're surrounded by like-minded individuals, and very successful um, CEOs, and so the opportunity to hone my skills um, with that group, I think was very rewarding. And you'll hear a lot of people talk about that's how they get identified for profit fiduciary board work, is they're serving on a board like the State Chamber of Commerce, and someone that's running a company, or is on the board or on a nominating committee, has the opportunity to see how you perform under pressure, how you handle difficult conversations. Uh, um, that's so that's a great way to quote to be identified.
And then for you, your nonprofits, are you still on some nonprofits? Are you on there now, or are you
Yeah,
involved?
I am. So I sit on the board of a um, public television foundation, one of the largest public television stations in United States, and been on that board for probably approaching 15 years. I actually chair the nominating committee and sit on the audit and finance committee. So there's an example of where it's a not-for-profit board, but it functions if you were to attend their board meetings to look at how the board meeting is run, if you look at the committees of the board, so like a nominating committee, I mean it functions just like a fiduciary board, and is comprised of individuals that are very successful entrepreneurs, some from private, some from public companies. So no, I'm still involved in it, and find it very rewarding.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you. And any sort of final words, maybe for people who are seeking out corporate boards and they may have been seeking them out for a while or they may be new. What would be some of your sort of last words or last pieces of advice?
Three things. Three things. Know your lane. I know you talk about this in your landing boards. You talk about what's your value proposition. Know your lane, and know what your lane is. Second, and the second and third are the two P's: patience and perseverance. Um, and I've had to remind myself of this on my journey, at least over the last 3 years, is that while landing a board seat um, is different than looking for a job, it really is. It is looking for a board job, and so it's probably not going to occur as fast is what you're used to things occurring, maybe even as you were changing careers. So patience, but perseverance are the two P's. So know your lane, and then practice patience and perseverance. And then I'll put a plug in for Naomi. Find someone that can be a mentor and a guide, and really be kind of your truth teller, that you can trust. We're back to the word trust, and that they will be candid with you if you're attempting to try to do something that's not right or not a good fit, or uh, if it's in preparing your board material and you think you've got something that you think is just all the bee's knees, and it doesn't cut it. So find someone like a Naomi that can be that person for you.
Okay, well, thank you, Bill. I really appreciate it. And I agree. I think when you're embarking on anything new, right, it's important to have a sort of personal trainer, right? If anything, who just kind of can guide you through. So that's wonderful. Well, listen, I've learned a lot here today, and I'm sure everyone else has. So thank you so much for joining me. This has really been a pleasure, and always enjoy speaking to you. So thanks again.
Thanks, Naomi.